Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? All quiet, please. Thank you. All right, so really looking forward to starting up this new unit with you guys. This is shared with you now. You've got, you want to print this off or have this available. It's on the Civil War, okay? And we're going to be doing this over the next 6 class periods all the way up until the end of the semester. And this is a huge, huge, huge period of history. Again, this is a another IB history unit. So this will definitely help you as you're preparing in time for your senior year, getting ready for the exams. So you definitely want to take really, really good notes on this, not only for the essay that you're going to write at the end of this semester, but also so you have those notes with you to prepare for your senior year, getting ready for that. So this is, you're going to get a lot out of this. This is a big, big thing, and it's pretty much almost entirely the United States of America. So if you got that in front of you, we're gonna see. We've got, I mean, the chapter in the textbook. Those are very, very good. Actually, there's a lot of information that's similar from the textbook to what I'm going to be providing you. So there's a lot of nice overlap there. No quizzes. We'll see how it works as far as like time. Normally, I'm able to show the film Lincoln, which is a really, really, really cool movie. And I highly recommend that. I've also got some really good trailers for some films that touch on the Civil War and aspects leading up to it as we go through this unit. So we'll be making some recommendations. In fact, I got 3 movie trailers for today's lesson. Really, really cool movies. Yeah, so what you want to have in front of you is we're going to do the segments Cotton Economy and Slavery, Origins of Civil War. Okay, and then the next time we'll get into lots of the details and so forth on abolitionist debate and so forth. Okay, so let me see. I'll go ahead and pull up my. There we go. Civil War. Yeah, Marvel did a movie about this. Yeah, Captain America is on one side. Yeah, with all these guys, and yeah, Iron Man and yeah, the Black Panther and so forth on the other side. Yeah, not exactly. I mean, a civil war, by definition, is a war that takes place within a country, among the people in the country. And in our country's history, it was a very big, big deal. Fighting broke out in 1861 and continued on until the war was over in 1865. Well, we're going to get started looking at the events leading up to it. And then we'll finish up this unit with the aftermath, which, I mean, literally some of the things that took place in the Civil War. The aftermath, it will continue all the way up until really the present. It's a big, big deal in our country's history. And a lot of the things kind of got started beforehand. We've covered this. We covered this certainly in our American Revolution unit, and that is the differences that we have even among 13, just a handful of colonies that become states, but there's differences. There's differences. Slavery exists. Do you remember which colonies, which states in the United States benefited from slavery, which had slavery at the time of the American Revolution? Well, as you recall, I mean, we got this map here. This shows 1850 and it shows the enslaved population. You look up in the north and you're like, oh, they didn't have slavery. And even, 60 or so years before that, 60 or 70 years before that, they didn't have much slavery. Okay, make sure you have this down. In the northern states, you really didn't have much slavery. You had small towns, small farms. There wasn't as much need economically for slavery. Now remember, did northerners, manufacturers, merchants, people who owned ships and did a lot of trading, did they financially benefit from the slave trade? Yeah. Remember that really creepy song from the movie 1776? The lasses to rum to slaves, the South Carolina senator sang. I mean, that was pretty intense. He was basically saying, hey, look, northerners, y'all are like talking like you don't think slavery is any good. Well, y'all are hypocrites because you make money off of the trade, the triangle trade, where you have slaves heading to the south to work in the fields, but the northerners make money off of it as well. And that is all part of that interconnected thing. So that's a key thing you need to write down. Slavery became a big part of the economy in the South because of the way the economy was set up in the South, right? In the North, by the time you get to 1850, you don't have slavery. In fact, the states, individual states, got rid of slavery. And it's pretty much up to the individual states. They get to make the laws with respect to that, whether or not that's allowed. And as we'll see in this unit, there's going to be forces, basically saying, like William Wilberforce, slavery is bad. It's a wrong thing. Well, that's a very important point, and we'll focus on that. But if you're trying to get a lot of people to agree with it and get rid of slavery, you're going to need to make some economic arguments as well. Well, it's easier to make the economic arguments in the North to get rid of slavery than it is in the South. Because in the South, they needed a lot of farm workers. And they wanted to keep the cost of all of that work done on the farms way down. And so in the South, it's very interesting because, put this down. Slavery was on the way out in the South. Well, it doesn't look like it's on the way out in the South here because it's like, whoa, it's actually grown quite a bit. And, to the West, it has spread. And we'll see this as we go through. You have, got your slavery in the original 13 states, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. Well, it spread. You had it in Florida. When Florida came in, it was a slave state. Right here, Alabama and Mississippi, slave states. Tennessee and Kentucky, slave states. Arkansas, Louisiana, when Texas came in, it was a slave state too. And then we'll talk about when Missouri came in, that's going to come in as a slave state too. Whereas these northern states, right, you got the original ones, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they were not slave states. Eventually they got rid of slavery altogether. And then as you added new states, Vermont peeled off from New York and Maine, they came in as non-slave states. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, they're going to come in as non-slave states as well. But what about all these other areas over here? It's going to get a little bit more complicated as we go through this story. But here's the kicker. Why was slavery so important? And it has something to do with an invention, right? It has to do with an invention that made growing and picking cotton easier. Cotton is a wonderful natural fiber that you grow and you pluck it and you get the seeds out, and that's no easy thing. And then you can weave all the cotton fibers into thread and you can make this wonderful fabric, cotton. Well, cotton grows much better in the South, obviously, than it does in the North, but it is hugely labor intensive. And so, it's not going to be an easy thing to grow. You might as well grow something else. And then Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793. This is going to be a hugely significant thing. Eli Whitney wasn't necessarily like, oh, I want to invent something that makes the spread of slavery and the necessity for slavery even greater. No, he came up with an invention that ended up working very well for the cotton farmers, and of course then they're able to grow more and more and more cotton. Well, what is it? Okay, what is it? Well, here it is. Look at this device. This is a cotton gin. You can see you've got the cotton balls plucked off of the plants. You still have to pluck them off of the plants, right? And you got them all in these big bundles. And then you process them through this cotton gin. And this gin has got this turning device with all these little sprickly kind of things and so forth in. And as it turns, it grabs the threads of the cotton and collects them. And then it takes the seeds out. You see right here? The seeds, what does it say? The seeds are too large to pass through the slots and they fall to the bottom of the gin. Wonderful. You don't have to hand pick out all the seeds. The cotton gin does it for you. And it is a huge, huge time-saving device, and it makes growing cotton very profitable for the people who are growing it in the South. And so instead of having maybe slavery is going to be on the way out, no, it grows in the South. Now, you're not going to get new slaves coming in from overseas. Early in the 1800s, Britain and then the United States as well stop the importation of slaves coming from Africa. But you continue to have the trade of slaves in the United States, in the southern states right here. And where would those slaves come from? From other slaves, right? Sometimes you had slaves reproducing with other slaves, and sometimes, as I mentioned before, earlier in the year, sometimes you had slaves who were reproducing as a result of their masters or their foremen impregnating them. And so slavery continued. And about a third of the population, even higher in some parts of the South, would be slaves, okay? Living on plantations, a lot of large plantations. Let's look at this picture. Most of the slaves tended to live on large plantations, doing a lot of work. There were many whites that owned a few slaves, and there were many more that didn't own any. They couldn't afford any during that time period. But you would have, like, some of these plantations were huge, and they just owned tens of hundreds of slaves. And as far as the work goes, it was much, much better to be the so-called house slave than a field slave. If you worked in the fields, you would work many, many hours. There you go, working in the fields. Very difficult on the back, very difficult on the hands, beatings, whips, rape. I mean, that could happen to a field slave as well as a house slave. Rapes occur because, I mean, basically you don't own yourself. Families broken apart, children. Basically, if you're born to a slave woman, you're a slave, and the owner could sell you off. They could sell off the siblings. And if you had a marriage, they could sell off your spouse. I mean, they could do whatever they wanted to you. You were property. You were not owned as a free person. And it's very interesting because a lot of the newer arrivals, a lot of immigrants didn't necessarily like the slaves because they were competition for jobs. I mean, if you're a new immigrant coming into the country, and you're competing for jobs, that are performed by slaves, it's not very good. And so you're going to see some difficulty. One of the things that's interesting I want to mention to you is, that's a photograph from the early years. Yeah. This person obviously had a master that was very interested in disciplining with a whip. And there's the scars. I mean, sometimes if somebody was hit that bad, they might just die from that. This person actually survived. I'm going to show you here in a moment a clip, actually the trailer for the movie 12 Years a Slave. And this brings up a very interesting point. As slavery became even more important due to the cotton economy, I mean, just make sure you understand this. By the year 1840, half of the value of all of the exports from the United States to other countries, half of the value was cotton. The South sold a lot of cotton, particularly to manufacturers, factories up in the north of the United States. They would turn the cotton into textiles and then sell it off to consumers. Britain was a big, big buyer of raw cotton from the South. I mean, there was shiploads and shiploads of cotton going from the American South over to Britain, to their factories, to their manufacturers, into textiles and so forth. And that was very, very, very hard. Early in the history of the United States, even before the United States, there were some African Americans that lived in the South, that were free, and some of them even owned slaves. But things started changing in the South as slavery became more and more important to the cotton industry, and especially as the North started complaining about, hey, well, we don't have slavery, and so on, you shouldn't have slavery down there, and da 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 da. So it became very hard to be a free African American living in the South. I mean, if you were a free African American living in the South, you probably maybe were thinking about maybe just getting out of there and heading up north, because bad things can happen to you. As is told in the story 12 Years a Slave, an African American who was living free in the North a musician, and he did performance in Washington, D.C. Now, let's just identify real quick. We'll go back to the map here. Washington, D.C., I don't know if you can tell, it was like created from a little bit of territory from Virginia and Maryland. Slavery exists in Washington, D.C. at the time. Slavery's all around. So you got Northup coming here from New York and to do a performance in Washington, D.C. What happens to him? Some bad men trick him. I think they like intoxicate him or something. They put something in his beverage and he's knocked out. And then he is taken into the Deep South and sold as a slave. And he is in a difficult situation. He writes the story 12 Years a Slave because, as you can tell, he ultimately was able to make it out. It's a very, very powerful story, and it gives you a real sense of this. It's rated R, as you can tell, because it shows the beatings, the whippings, the rape, and so forth, the mistreatment of African Americans, including Mr. Northup. Let's show you the clip here of the trailer. Let's see. Here we go. There it is. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and play this one for you. Very intense. Again, it's R-rated, but comes with a high recommendation.
I want to ask you what part of the country you come from.
I originate from Canada. I guess where that is.
Oh, I know where Canada is. I've been there myself.
Well, travel for a slave.
Solomon Northup is an expert player on the violin.
I was born a free man, lived with my family in New York.
Be good for your mother.
Till the day I was deceived.
To Solomon.
Kidnapped, sold into slavery.
Well, boy, how you feel now?
My name is Solomon Northup. I'm a free man, and you have no right whatsoever to detain me.
You're no free man. You're nothing but a Georgia runaway.
Went down to the river Jordan.
And that servant
That don't obey his Lord
shall be beaten with many stripes. That's scripture.
The condition of your laborers, it's all wrong.
They're my property.
You say that with pride.
I say it as fact.
Man does how he pleases with his property.
You come here.
I say come here! Days ago, I was with my family, in my home. Now you tell me all is lost.
If you want to survive, do and say as little as possible.
Well, I don't want to survive. I want to live.
You know something.
I did as instructed. There's something wrong. It's wrong with the instruction.
Master brought you here to work. Any more, I'll earn you 100 lashes.
I know what it's like to be the object of Master's lash.
No! In his own time, good Lord will manage them all.
I will survive. I will not fall into despair. I will keep myself hardy till freedom is opportune.
was a free man. I'm not a slave.
Yeah, Solomon Northup. Wow, very, very powerful movie, and highly recommended. Here we go. Yeah, there's some intense stuff we got coming up in this unit, and yeah, you have in order to understand where the Civil War is coming from, ultimately you got to talk about slavery. Slavery leads right up to it. There's a lot of other stuff leading up to it as well, but at the heart, that's why we get right into this. Slavery is key, and there is a big difference of opinion on what should be the situation with respect to slavery. Slavery becomes less and less popular in the North, and in the South, they're like, man, we're gonna have to keep it because it is part of our culture, it's part of our heritage, it is part of our economic situation, and we don't want to be pushed around by the folks up in the North. So, I mean, eventually you will get it to 1860, and the Southern states are gonna go, yeah, we're out of here, and the Northern states are gonna go, maybe not. We'll continue telling that story. So we get to where we are in our notes now. The next bullet point excuse me, adaptation and resistance. Adaptation and resistance. As slavery is spreading to the West, there is resistance. And we're going to look at the abolitionist movement in great detail. The idea of abolishing the institution of slavery, making it illegal altogether. And ultimately, that is going to happen. Slavery will be made illegal after the Civil War. Part of that abolitionist movement is an effort to help runaway slaves and trying to help them to get from the Deep South and up to the North, and even more so, make sure you have this down, even more so up to Canada, because Canada is like a whole other country. You talked about before. I mean, it's in the process of gaining its independence-ish from the British, but the British have gotten rid of slavery altogether, and they have no obligation to return slaves that made it to Canada, to return them to the Deep South of the United States of America. Whereas, make sure you write this down, there's going to be a big issue because there's a national law called the Fugitive Slave Law. And those laws are actually going to get tougher over time. And the idea is that not only can people head up to the North trying to find these runaway slaves and bring them to justice, it is against the law for Northerners in the United States to provide harbor, to provide safe house for these runaway slaves. And so the goal ultimately, you can see with the arrows and so forth, the goal ultimately is to make it up to Canada, because it ain't good enough just to ultimately get to, say, Pennsylvania or Ohio or New York. The Underground Railroad is very interesting. It's like, is it on tracks? No, I mean, it's not on tracks, but this like this system of houses and people who work together, very, very difficult in the southern areas, to help slaves hide out during the day, make it to the next stop in the night, as they continue on, making it all the way up to a new life in the North, and especially up into Canada. Probably, and some of you guys have heard of this woman before, probably one of the most famous Underground Railroad conductors is somebody who's going to have the name of Moses, like, you know, Moses frees the Jews from Egypt. But it's a woman, and her name is Harriet Tubman. And she escaped from, I can point it out here, she escaped from Maryland and made her way up to Pennsylvania. And then she came back, trying to get her family. And she came back again. And she came back many times. She was never captured. In fact, during the Civil War, I didn't realize until I saw the movie Harriet, during the Civil War, she was actually a participant with the United States Army against Confederate forces with the goal of freeing more African-American slaves in the Deep South, I want to say around the Louisiana area. And yeah, so Harriet Tubman is a big, big deal. There's Harriet Tubman. She was persistent, and she was motivated, and she felt a great deal of faith. Some people said, oh, you know, she's got visions because she got hit in the head when she was a slave. And she goes, no, I have visions because I am in communication with the Almighty. And so the fact of the matter is Harriet Tubman was a big, big deal in history. Now, the southern states hated the fact that Harriet Tubman was doing this, and that others were doing this as well. I mean, there were 4 million slaves in the South. You know, only 1,000 or so got away every year, but this is something, and they were mad. The Southerners are mad that they were making it up to the North. Very, very, very upsetting. Where does Harriet Tubman fit in American history? Well, remember I showed you that $20 bill? I give you a quick brief. That $20 bill of Andrew Jackson, maybe on the way out, Trail of Tears. Yeah, it doesn't look so good in the modern light of history. In the previous administration, the Barack Obama administration, the Department of Treasury had set it up for a new $20 bill. And Harriet Tubman's all set to be on the $20 bill. It hasn't become official during the current administration, but there's an anticipation that probably at some point, Harriet, first female on a United States currency, first African American on a United States currency, and they've already even picked out the picture. So, you know, who knows? When, if, probably when. Harriet Tubman will be on the United States currency. Okay. Ah, and there's a movie, the trailer. I got to show you this trailer. I saw this. This came out last year, 2019. Harriet Tubman. Powerful. Are you guys ready for this? All right, let's check this out. All right. Come on, Zoom. Help us out here. All right, we did that one. Okay. Let's go to Harriet. And there she is. And let's go ahead and play the trailer for you. I highly recommend this one as well. You guys will enjoy this.
There's not much time. You got to be miles away from here before dawn. Where is she? Follow that North Star. If there are no stars, just follow the river. Listen for them. Fear is your enemy. Whoa, easy now.
I'm gonna be free or die.
I don't know if you know how extraordinary this is, but you have made it 100 miles to freedom all by yourself. Would you like to pick a new name to mark your freedom?
Harriet Tubman.
You are welcome here anytime.
If I'm free, my family should be too. I made up my mind, I'm going back.
You're confident, composed. When trouble comes, you'll be ready.
Papers. Says here you're 5.5 feet tall. You ain't more than 5 feet.
Must have won my high boots that day.
Why you back here? It ain't safe.
I come to get you. Bring all of you to freedom.
Do you know what would happen if you got caught? You got lucky, Harriet.
I made it this far on my own, so don't you tell me what I can't do.
Harriet, welcome to the Underground Railroad. Everybody, everywhere is looking for you.
God don't mean people to own people.
Find this thief and burn her at the stake.
Harriet!
I would give every last drop of blood in my veins until this monster called slavery is dead. Ready?
Yeah, if you haven't seen that one, you're going to like that one a lot. Very good movie. Harriet. All right. Oh, let's get back to the thing here. There we go. And there we go. All right. Continuing on now. Origins of the Civil War. That's the next main heading point there. Origins of the Civil War. Let's get right to it. Okay. There are some big issues among the states, and we saw this in the American Revolution with the discussion of the Declaration of Independence. We saw this with the creation of the Constitution, which gave more rights, more responsibilities to the federal government. Remember that? Because after the United States became independent, we had 13 powerful states, and most of the decisions were made by those states. Well, they came together, created a constitution, gave the United States government a lot of authority. And it's fascinating during this time of quarantine and so forth, you know, this question of, well, who's in charge of, you know, when the economy is going to open up and what's going to do this and so forth. And all kinds of very interesting debates, you know. Does the president have all the power? Do the governors have a lot of the power? Well, it turns out a lot of these kinds of things, governors actually maintain a lot of power. But it does get interesting because if the Constitution says the federal government has the power, then the federal government, the national government has the power. Make sure you have this in there. Article 6 of the Constitution. It's called the Supremacy Clause. And it basically says that the United States Constitution, the laws of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, there is the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which basically says, look, if these If the United States government hasn't been given specific authority over things, then the states maintain that authority. And so there's a lot of things, you know, that are maintained by the states. But some things aren't. So if the federal government can do things, then can a state stop it, right? Can a state stop that action? That's what's going to be very interesting. And we're going to look at a few cases, and we're going to see that this supremacy clause is very powerful. Here's a stupid meme. There's the federal law, a cat, and there's the state law, a dog. This is my supremacy clause. Okay, anyway. It's good for those of you guys like cats. That's cool. If you don't like it, well. But here's the deal. Should I have that slide? No, let's go, yeah, let's go back to this one. 3 very important cases. You can see them in your notes there. McCulloch versus Maryland, Cohens versus Virginia, Gibbons versus Ogden. This is very important. In the history of the United States and studying government, the United States Supreme Court is very, very important because the United States Supreme Court is the final decision maker when it comes to interpreting what is and what is not in the United States Constitution and how to interpret the United States Constitution, right? The early members of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Marshall, he was the Chief Justice. There were only 3 members of the court back then. There's 9 now, a big whoop. But he was the one who wrote the decision. And you ready? Here's the first one you're going to write down. McCulloch versus Maryland, 1819. There was a dispute. It boils down to this. The national government, the US government, made a law creating a national bank. The politicians, government of Maryland didn't like it. And they're like, well, we're going to tax the US bank in Maryland. And the US Bank in Maryland is like, you can't do that. You're trying to tax us into oblivion. We have the right. The Constitution says that we can establish this. And so how did the Supreme Court rule? The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the federal government based on the Supremacy Clause. So that was one clear example where a state could not mess with the federal government. You're going to see many, many other examples over the history of the United States. Another example, let's give you the next one, it comes from the case called Cohens versus Virginia. Do you see that one in your notes? Okay, that's from 1821. Another case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It was a case that arose in the state of Virginia, and there were issues involved in that case that had to do with the United States law, that had to do with the United States Constitution. Well, can the US Supreme Court be the final decider of some state case? Yes, where there are issues of your United States laws or your United States constitutional rights. Those cases can make their way all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. So if the US Supreme Court disagrees with the highest court in Virginia, who wins? Yeah, cat wins. Okay, all right. So we're starting to see a trend here. Next one, Gibbons versus Ogden, 1824. This one, another United States Supreme Court case. This one came out of New York. It was a law passed in the state of New York, and they were trying to regulate trade with the state of New Jersey, all right? Well, if you remember, the United States Constitution, when it was created, decided that regulating trade between states, that was left up to the federal government. That wasn't going to be up to the states anymore. States couldn't like tack tariffs and things like that on other states. That issue was going to the United States government. And so, question in Gibbons versus Ogden, could New York regulate the trade that it was doing with New Jersey? Supreme Court says, no, you cannot do that. Okay, so there's another example. So we've got, and as we look through here, eventually it's like, you know, can the United States say, hey, you know, no slavery anywhere? Can the United States do, hey, you know, I mean, this is going to come up again and again and again. When we get to the Supreme Court, one of the very, very important cases, the Supreme Court's the Dred Scott case, that's going to be coming up later on. You know, can a Southerner who owns property take that property up to the north and still own that property? Well, if it's your briefcase, yes. But if it's your slave, and they don't allow slavery in a northern state, Is the Supreme Court going to step in on those kinds of cases? It's going to get very, very interesting. Okay, very, very interesting. All right, I want to turn your attention to the next bullet point here, modernization. All right, modernization in the country. Okay, so you kind of know this already, right? The United States started on which coast? East or, yeah, the East Coast. Okay, so we've got this thing going on, and we saw this in the last unit, where the United States spreads from east to west, right? We purchase, obtain, or defeat Mexico and obtain property. You know, so eventually we go coast to coast, Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. And we see various different developments taking place in the north and in the south. In the south, make sure you have this. In the south, it's mostly going to be agriculture, agriculture, agriculture. In the north, you're going to have more and more industrialization, more manufacturing, and more people in the north. A lot of the immigrants that are coming from Europe are settling in the north, in these cities like Boston and New York and Philadelphia, and then over here in Detroit and Chicago and Cleveland and Cincinnati and Milwaukee and so forth. Those areas in the north, write it down, they're growing quite a bit. Okay, you can see here the map is showing railroad, the development of railroads and moving goods and so forth. You got tons of railroads being developed here up in the north, which is great for manufacturing and transportation and so forth. You may have them in the south, but you've got tons and tons of them up in the north because of the increased population there and the increased need for moving goods. Is that going to make any difference if the north and the south go to war? Keep that in mind, because if you're going to fight a war, what would it be better to have? The ability to move things, get to battles by railroad or by foot? Anyway, keep that in mind. So we've got lots and lots of growth in the north. Most of the immigrants, of course, moving to the north. And as far as like political power in the United States Congress, think about this. The House of Representatives, the Senate. House of Representatives. Each state gets a number of representatives based on its population. Well, you know, in the years leading up to the Civil War, which area of the country is growing most in population? Yeah, I'm circling it right here. The North. So eventually you're going to have huge representation groups coming from New York and Pennsylvania and so forth. The North will outnumber the South in the House of Representatives. But remember, here's the deal. This was part of the Great Compromise between the big states and the small states in the Constitutional Convention. How many senators does each state get? Because if you're going to pass a law, it's got to pass the House and the Senate, and then get signed by the president in most instances. So how many senators does each state get, even if it's a little state? 2. So even states like New York, because eventually New York's going to end up being the most populous state, and they have a whole bunch of House of Representatives, but they got 2 senators. So a key thing that we're going to be looking at as we go through here is as the country grows and they add more states, like territories, like the Minnesota territory becomes a state, and it gets 2 senators and whatever number of representatives based on its population. But as they come in, the South is going to be very, very, very cautious. They want to make sure as a state comes in that allows for slavery, they don't want there to be 2 states coming in that don't allow for slavery. So they always want to keep this balance. Keep that in mind. They're always going to be looking for a balance in the Senate. They can, you know, whatever, who cares about the House? Because if the House passes something and the southern states don't like it, they'll stop it in the Senate. All right. And of course, if they get a southern sympathetic president, they're in good shape there too. Okay. So we get more and more rivalry between the North and the South, right? The North isn't really keen on having new states coming in to the Union that allow for slavery. The South, of course, wants to make sure that that's going to be the case. And for a while, it didn't make much difference. It was very interesting because you had like the Louisiana Purchase. I don't know if you can kind of imagine here. Louisiana Territory, that was all right up here. And then, of course, you had Texas. Well, that was part of Mexico. And all this stuff was part of Mexico. And so this was very interesting as they went through. So Missouri, let's look at this one. Missouri was going to go from being a territory to a state. Now, Missouri, make sure you have this down. Missouri had allowed for slavery. And the northern states were like, oh, we don't want to upset the balance. They didn't want to have too many slave states. So what are they going to do? Can they just let Missouri in or not let Missouri in? I mean, like, what? So they actually, with the help of this man, Senator Henry Clay, Mr. Compromise. Actually, he was one of the leading war hawks in the War of 1812, saying, yeah, let's go after Britain. Senator Henry Clay is going to be the great architect, the guy who comes up with a compromise. He's from Kentucky, but his big picture is the United States of America. In fact, he wanted to be president one day. Never quite got there, but he's always for like, can we balance this? Can we do this? Can we, like, you know, John Greenwood, he kicks the issue down the road so that, you know, the slave issue is going to be dealt with later on. But he was the one who came up with a compromise in 1820. There you go. Let's get the deal here. I'll get the give the details here. This map actually helps quite a bit. This is the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The key decision there is Missouri, right, is going to be admitted into the Union as a slave state. So the laws of this the state of Missouri will allow for slavery. Okay, and you can see that's just like Kentucky, Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Tennessee, and so forth. And you can see Arkansas probably going to be coming along that way too. And oh wait, at this time, Texas and so forth, that was all part of Mexico. But how are they going to balance that? Well, Maine, which used to be part of Massachusetts, it was actually part of the Massachusetts state. They're going to peel Maine off of Massachusetts, and it comes into the country as a state. And in a sense, it was already part of the United States. It was part of Massachusetts, but now it comes in as a separate state, and it's a free state, free soil state, no slavery. Okay, understand that? That's part of the Missouri Compromise. And look at this. Let's keep an eye on this one. Look at this line, 36 degrees, 30, whatever, 3630. That's the latitude line going across along here. And the idea is from here on out, this was part of the Missouri Compromise. From here on out, besides Missouri, nothing else up here from the Louisiana Territory is going to come in as state or states allowing for slavery. If you're below that line, then you can have slavery. So Arkansas, when it comes in, is going to be a slave state. No surprise there. You know, that'll probably balance out when like Michigan right here, Wisconsin comes in. So you're going to keep that balance, and that's going to be very, very important. Crisis averted for now. Keep in mind, because that 3630 line here, you're going to go, well, what's going to happen, you know, with this, you know, territory from Mexico? Because this 3630 line is going to cut right across here, right through what is California, right? Texas will come in as a slave state, but what about up here? I mean, what if there's an effort to get slaves in, like Kansas, for example, you know, or Idaho? They're going to go cotton in Idaho? I don't think so. But in any event, the Missouri Compromise solved the problem in 1820, but will it continue to solve the problem from here on out? Not quite. All right. So let's continue on looking at the situation in the United States as we go through there. We're going to talk about the Nullification Crisis. You see where that is, the bullet point Nullification Crisis? All right, so we got some conflicts going on here, and it's going to give you a little bit of a sense of this whole North versus South thing, okay? So, 1828, okay? Here is a crisis that is going to occur during the presidency of John Quincy Adams. All right, let's first figure this one out. John Quincy Adams, can you figure it out? Where is he from? Is he from the North? Is he from the South? He's an Adams. He is the son of John Adams and Abigail Adams. He's from Massachusetts. He's a Northerner, okay? He's not a real big fan of slavery. In fact, he hates slavery. He's the president at this time, and he is able to get through Congress a law that will help American business by putting in a fairly high tariff. Now, these are American businesses, manufacturers, mostly, of course, where are they located? North. So the northern manufacturers like this tariff because basically what it does is it says, okay, if you've got British manufactured goods coming into the United States, there's going to be a tariff on them, right? So it helps the American businesses to compete better in America, right? Because otherwise then, you know, people will buy the cheapest stuff, and maybe that cheap stuff comes from Britain, and so that's a little bit harder on the folks up in the north. Okay, so the northern states like this high tariff from 1828, right? About the southern states. Now, because they like buying perhaps cheaper manufactured goods from Britain. And they're like, this doesn't seem to help us at all, because does that high tariff, does that protect like the value of cotton and cotton sales and so forth? So they're going to be pushing, the southern states are going to be pushing real hard to get rid of that tariff or to try and reduce that tariff and, just kind of mess it up. And a key state is going to be a leader in the opposition to the tariff. That is South Carolina. We're going to see South Carolina is going to be the lead dog when it comes to Southern opposition to whatever. And in this case, tariffs. I mean, if you got folks in South Carolina, they're basically saying, we're not even interested in seeing that tariff enforced. If we got British goods coming into Charleston, South Carolina, we don't think that tariff should be collected. So it starts to get a little bit dicey here, all right? So South Carolina is actually making an argument. You ready? The South Carolina legislators are making an argument that it could nullify, that's the key word, nullify the federal law, the tariff law, that they could just sort of say, no, we're not going to collect the taxes here in South Carolina. We don't like it. That law doesn't exist here. Can you do that? Can you do that? I mean, is there anything in the Constitution that basically says if the federal government has the right to have tariffs that states can nullify that? Oh, did we get to that? Oh yeah, the Supreme. No, I don't think that's going to go very well. Yeah, here's the null. Yeah, there's South Carolina on that nullification thing going on here. But nevertheless, the idea is floating out there, and we're going to see that nullification idea is like, well, can we get rid of federal laws on this and that and so forth? Well, the law is kicking around for quite some time. By 1832, another compromise is reached, right? Okay, so we got the 1832 new tariff. And what's the new tariff going to be? Well, it's a lower tariff, okay? A lower tariff. That's a compromise. Is that going to make the folks in South Carolina and other southern states happy? Not necessarily, okay? In fact, in South Carolina, you're going to start getting more and more people walking around going, I think we're going to declare this tariff null and void, right? And you know what? And maybe we'll just go ahead and leave the union, because we came into the union voluntarily, and we can leave the union voluntarily. We can do that, right? I mean, we voted on it, and yeah. It's interesting because, let me see, John Quincy Adams wasn't the president by the time the compromise tariff came in. The compromise tariff came in 1833, and that was the first year of the presidency of Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson, he's, not from Massachusetts. I'm going to say he started out in Kentucky, Tennessee, yeah, he didn't like the fact that the southern states are particularly in South Carolina, are going against this. By the way, the 1833 compromise, Senator Clay from Kentucky, and the compromise bill lowers the tariff by like 10% over 8 years. I mean, it's not anything that the Southerners really love, and the Northerners aren't that excited about it anyway. But the fact that some Southerners are talking about leaving the Union, here's Andrew Jackson's response. Nullification means insurrection or war, and the other states have a right to put it down. He basically said, I'm going to bring the army down there, and if I find any nullification leaders in South Carolina, I'm just going to hang them, because they're traitors to the country. That was in the 1830s. By the way, can you guess which state was the very first state that left the Union at the beginning of the Civil War? South Carolina. Yeah. All right. South Carolina. There were some big differences in between, and let's just remind you, I've got that bullet point right there. Economic differences between the North and South. I mean, it kind of belies the point. Which was wealthier? North. Which had more manufacturing? The North. Which tended to have farms that were smaller? The North. Which tended to have farms that tended to be a bit bigger? South. But did they have much manufacturing in the South? No, they did not. Okay, and ultimately, those economic differences are going to be quite significant. Okay, I want to wrap up here just by mentioning to you John Quincy Adams, when he left the presidency, and he wanted to serve another term, didn't get elected. He went back to the House of Representatives. I mean, this is weird. A former president of the United States ended up serving in the United States House of Representatives all the way till the end of his life. He literally was there, and he participated in all kinds of debates. And he didn't like slavery. He did not like slavery. And as things start heating up and so forth, he's like, yeah, I do not like this at all. And he had very, very good arguments and so forth. Ultimately, during one of the debates, he died on the floor of the House of Representatives. But he's an interesting figure because I want to tell you very briefly here the story of a ship. And it was a slave ship where the slaves brought over from Africa had a successful mutiny, and they overtook, the ship was called the Amistad. And I mean, they're headed to the Caribbean or someplace, and then they make their way to the United States. And then there's this big question of like, are they free? Are they owned? If so, who owns them? So there's this big, huge fight, court fight going on. And John Quincy Adams, played by Anthony Hopkins, is one of the attorneys in the case. And he's arguing ultimately to the United States Supreme Court that these men should be free. And the Supreme Court rules that they are free, that they were not slaves already from a slave-owning state or country. They had been forced into slavery in Africa, and that was illegal at that time in history. And so these men ultimately, after a long time going through the courts and yada, 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 they made their way back to Africa. But here I'm going to go ahead and play this clip, another highly recommended one. This is the Steven Spielberg film that he did called Amistad, telling the story of the 1839 mutiny. And yeah, you got great performances, Morgan Freeman, Matthew McConaughey, and so forth. And yeah, let's go ahead and check this out. Where's my finger here? We need to get past Harriet and to Amistad. And come on, and hit play. You'll like this one.
They were first detained by officers of a survey brig off the coast of Long Island. Can only assume that the charge is murder.
We do hereby claim salvage on the high seas of the Spanish ship La Amistad and all her cargo.
Your Honor, here are the true owners of these slaves.
These slaves, Your Honor, are by rights the property of Spain.
You and this young so-called lawyer have proven you know what they are. They're Africans. Congratulations. What you don't know is who they are.
This could take us all one long step closer to civil war.
Immediately surrender these goods!
Our president has appealed the decision to our Supreme Court. We have to try the case again.
I will call into the past and beg my ancestors to come and help me, for at this moment I am the whole reason they have existed at all.
This is the most important case ever come before this court, because what it in fact concerns is freedom, the very nature of man. And the proof is the length to which a man will go to regain it once taken. He will break loose his chains. He will decimate his enemies. He will try and try and try against all odds, against all prejudices, to get home.
Yeah, Yeah, nice movie. You guys are going to enjoy that if you get a chance. If you got some time, yeah, I got some very good movies for you to check out. Amistad is one of them. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten through the first two sections there on the this note packet, this unit dealing with Civil War. We're going to continue next time on abolitionist debate. We got all kinds of interesting stuff coming up. I mean, like, where's this going to lead? Is this going to lead to, like, yes, it's going to lead to war. And so that's where we're going to head. Okay, so I'm all done for you guys today. You guys take care, be safe, and we'll talk to you more later.